Hello, I'm Paul Briley, and you're listening to Off the Comma. I'm a human who cares about supporting other humans. On this podcast, we explore all facets of what it means to feel stuck in life. We talk with people just like us who found themselves sitting on a comma and not knowing where to go next. We'll unpack the experience with them, where they've been stuck, what it feels like, what they experienced, and what they learned. My goal is to inspire you by seeing yourself in others. I believe that when we feel more connected and seen, magic can happen. And remember, if you find yourself sitting on a comma in your life, you can also talk to me without a microphone. To explore coaching with me and getting off the comma in your own life, check out my information and book a call with me at offthecomma.com. And I'm also doing something different. I'm curating my own sponsor community, local businesses and professionals who I handpick and who align with our vision here. Be sure to check them out, learn more about them on my website and my YouTube channel. In the meantime, let's get into this week's conversation. We are back for another exciting episode of Off the Comma, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here at this particular point in our year, and I'm so kind of like amazed by how much time is flying and, where we are. I think back to, being a child and never even thought I would be alive this long, which is so crazy because I couldn't imagine not being. But anyway. Another episode. We have passed our 2-year milestone now. This podcast has been going for over 2 years now, which is also something I never anticipated, but I'm so excited that it is. And I'm looking forward to where the podcast goes next. And this week, I'm also excited to talk to someone and get to meet her through her story and add her to my network of connections and people that I've gotten to know. And I'm really excited to introduce Patty Cabot. I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment. And she is coming to us from the East Coast to the U.S. And I'm just going to stop rambling. Patty, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us how would you like to be known? And then what would you like for us to know about you? And thanks for being here, by the way.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you, and congratulations on your 2-year anniversary. That's quite a milestone.
Thank you.
How do I like to be known? I go by she, her pronouns. My name is Patty. I live in New York City. I have a 10-and-a-half-month-old puppy. She's a German Shepherd mix, and she is cute as can be. Let's see, what else? I'm a runner, and I like little tiny lap dogs. I grew up with a Lhasa Apso, but I wanted to run with a dog. And you were talking about time flying. So I am 58, and my sister and I joke about the fact that we could now say things like, do you remember 40 years ago? Which is like such a funny concept.
Isn't it though? Oh my gosh.
And I decided if I was ever going to run with a dog, it's now or never. So,
nice.
So I'm excited about that. And you had asked me about adjectives that I would use to describe myself. And I would say I am resilient and tenacious. I have that in spades, which is great. And I had told you that I hope to think, or I like to think that I'm open. I'm definitely much more open than I used to be. But that is definitely a work in progress. And it is funny because I was thinking about what adjectives do I not like about myself that I would also use to describe myself. And in relation to my sweet dog, Juniper, I'm not patient. I'm not. I am not that person.
Okay.
I'm trying to work on that, but it's hard.
Well, you're speaking directly to me because I am one of those people. Even in my best of moments, there's still impatience there. So let's for at least the next hour, I will give you a permission slip to not dwell on that piece and that part. But I am really curious to hear more about what you mean when you say I would like to believe or I want to be open, but not if that's going to be a part of your story. So I'll let you decide, like, how much do you want to say about that now versus when we get into our questions here in a little bit?
I think it definitely is part of our questions, but I would say as a general rule, I think we all know people that are open and not open, right? And sometimes, I think you probably can also peg yourself where you are. And I have a very good friend who she is what I endeavor to be. She's just open to everything good and positive and beautiful and wonderful in the world. She doesn't question it. She feels like she's grateful for everything great that happens, but she doesn't she's just open. She just lets it all come in. And I think, again, for a very long time, I was exactly the opposite. It's like, because I think I was very controlling. And I think the more controlled you are, the more, at least in my experience, the more controlled you are, the more that you're trying to, obviously keep things out or in, or so there isn't this openness to just let things come, right? Then you're not controlling it. So if that makes any
Okay.
sense.
I think it does. And what I was going to reflect back for you, or to you, I should say, is, it sounds like the open is really in and of itself open, open to ideas, activities, people, thoughts, opinions, because sometimes that open can be clarified with open to trying new things, or open to all kinds of foods, or, 1,001 and more.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It sounds like you're open to being open to things that are open. Patty, before we continue on, and I so appreciate you clarifying that, this is going to kind of blossom in the story that you're going to share with us. What else would be important for us to know about you? I don't ask the whole, what do you do for a living crap? If that's important to you, then by all means share it to us, but I don't want you to feel like you have to lead with that. What's important to you? What do you like to do? What would be important for us to know about you?
I think, it's so funny because I had mentioned that I'm 58, and I think it's so interesting when you get older. And I like to believe that the one great thing about getting older is that, I spent a lot of time in therapy. I know myself. So I think I have a very good sense of perspective about things that matter, things that don't matter, what's important to me. I feel like I know myself, which is a really good thing. It's a helpful thing to know yourself. And I think for a long time, I didn't know myself. And I think, again, this whole notion of what's important to know about me is, when push comes to shove, I want my friends and my neighbors and my community to think I'm a good person. Like, that's what matters to me. Like, am I a good person? Like, am I kind? Am I caring? Do I do the right thing? Like, it really does come down to values. And I mean, in terms of what I do, I'm a writer, and, it's great. I love what I do for a living, and, that's fantastic. But it doesn't define who I am. And I don't think it matters what someone does for a living. It really shouldn't define who they are, because there's other things that are more intrinsic, I think, that are more important. Unless you're obviously curing cancer, solving world hunger,
Well, but I appreciate you sharing, and leaning on the side of values, what's important to you, what matters, how you want to be perceived and seen, and how you want to see yourself. I mean, those things are all things that I certainly admire, and I appreciate those traits, you sharing those. And not just, oh, well, here's what I've accomplished, or here's how much money I've made, or here's what my title is, and so forth. Okay.
Well, and I think what we accomplish is another thing that's really interesting, right? Like, what do you consider an accomplishment? Is being a good friend an accomplishment? Is helping someone in need an accomplishment? I would say yes, right?
Such an important clarifier. So I left out the words "what I accomplish for work," which is what we often, lean on. But to your point, those things can be work, whether you're getting paid for it or not. So
yeah.
Always talk about being open, right? Always open to how we define things, or how we approach things, or frame things. Well, I know we're going to get to know more about you as your story unfolds. And so let's get closer to the story. We're going to get into the 5 questions here in just a moment. And of course, you and I haven't talked about your story. I don't know what you're going to be sharing with us, and that's by design. So I'm looking forward to hearing your story. But before we get started, one of the things I do with every guest is I ask, as you think ahead to the next, call it 30 to 40 minutes or so, and you're sharing your story with us today, what intention would you have for yourself?
I would say there are certain things that I want to convey that are important to me, that are really the driver of the whole conversation. So, not to be a spoiler, I mean, it's not like they're mind-boggling or anything. It's not like I can transcend time and space, but so I do have certain messages I want to just make sure that I convey that I think are important.
And what will be important about conveying those messages to you? I know those messages are part of the story, but what kind of, I guess the question is, like, why is that important to you today?
I think based on my story, one of them is that it was something I never believed. So, and I think, and we'll get into this too, but there's a world of difference between understanding something intellectually and believing it emotionally. They are two
Mm.
very different things. And so you could say very rationally, well, I know X, Y, and Z, but if you don't believe X, Y, and Z in your soul, it doesn't really matter what you know, right?
Mm.
And I think for me, it was the difference between understanding something intellectually and finally getting there emotionally. And I think maybe if I had heard it enough times, I would have gotten there sooner. I don't know that I would have or not, but you know.
Mm. Mm. I personally love that. I'm self-referencing right now, but I personally love that because that's one of the things that I struggle with a lot in my life. And I imagine others do too. And it's hard to explain to people sometimes, right? When you're like, I know that I am not benefiting by feeling this way or thinking this way or doing these things or whatever. Like, I already know what the right answer is, but how I feel about it, I kind of feel a little bit helpless about that. And maybe there's a belief there and so forth. So I appreciate that. My intention, Patty, is to support your intention, obviously, by creating the space for you to be able to share your story, and that there will be people out there who hear your story who will see a little bit of themselves in you and the story that you share with us. They will feel a little bit more connected, a little bit less alone, and in the best of cases, feel inspired or empowered to go and do something that they've been wanting to do.
I love that. And that is exactly why I am here.
Mm. Okay, then let's jump into it. So, Patty, the first of the 5 questions is, where in your life have you found yourself sitting on a comma?
So that is such an interesting question for me because I have felt stuck at many points in my life. And I'm going to take you back to what really became like kind of the tipping point for me. So starting in my teens, I started to gain or lose 50 to 75 pounds every 2 years, and I did it for 20 years. And I
Mm.
could not figure out why. And I was a phenomenal dieter, so I could always lose the weight, but 2 years would go by and I'd be up 75 pounds. And it was rinse and repeat. And when I was in my late 30s, I kind of had this epiphany where I thought, if I don't crack the code on this, I will be doing it for the rest of my life. And it was
Mm.
exhausting. It was exhausting. So I sought out a therapist who dealt in eating disorders. And I went to her. And I have to say, too, while my weight was the motivator, what really was at the essence of it is I wanted to be open to love. I wanted to have love in my life. And I felt like the way I looked was an impediment to me attracting a man, which is, of course,
Mm.
nonsense. And mentally healthy people don't think that. But I thought that, right? Like I just was very focused on how I looked. So I go to see this therapist. I find someone, we connect, and we mine my history, which for those who haven't been in therapy, it's very common. You kind of go through your life's events. And we landed on my childhood sexual abuse, which I was always
Mm.
aware of, but I just never dealt with, right? Like I just never, it was primarily my stepfather. It started when I was maybe 2. I don't even know how old. They divorced
Mm.
before my 11th birthday. We moved cross country. I never saw him again. Out of sight, out of mind. I thought, past history as far as I was concerned. But that's not how trauma works, right? It's just not.
Mm.
So everything that happens to you informs you, whether you're thinking about it or not. And so I think, again, at that moment, it was like a life-changing moment for me to realize, to have somebody say. And so basically what my therapist said to me was, your weight is just a symptom of the abuse. And until you
Mm.
resolve that, you will always be battling your weight because it's not about your weight. And that was
Mm.
really like a mind-blowing moment for me. And it started the next 12 years of my life in therapy.
I just want to acknowledge you for a moment because, you know, the thing at the root, right? Like, not everybody deals with these kinds of things. Everybody's got their own things that they're carrying, but I just want to acknowledge how difficult that must have been for you to seek answers and solutions to a thing and then finally come face to face with, no, there's even something deeper that really needs to be faced.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have to say it is kind of like, you talk about really not imagining yourself where you are and what your life will be, and, time that passes. There was many, many years of my life where I would have sooner chosen death than ever tell anybody what I just shared with you in your community.
Mm.
It was that deeply shameful to me. And I felt ruined. And I never thought about it. I tamped it down. I didn't tell my closest friends. I didn't tell anybody. And I think, secrets beget secrets beget secrets. And it's all an evil cycle that continues over and over and over again. And you said so many smart things in there that I want to comment on. But one of them is, I think it's very easy, particularly for people who battle the same problem repeatedly, to not be addressing the root cause, right? Because it's
Mm.
hidden from us, right? Because whatever hell we think we're in by dealing with our alcoholism, drug use, pornography addiction, gambling, whatever we're doing to self-soothe or distract ourselves, what we are self-soothing or distracting from is even worse, right? And so I
Mm.
think, again, if that sounds like you, and mine was food and my weight, food and my weight, it was an endless cycle and it was miserable. But again, it was the lesser evil.
I can so relate to this, and this is a theme that has come up with a lot of guests on the podcast. And of course, I hear this in the circles that I run in with coaching and so forth. And it's something that I too, face as well, to self-reference again. And it's like we talk about in the sober circles, right? Like I quit drinking a little over 3 years ago. I had a 25-year run with alcohol. So my thing was the alcohol. And you know what's interesting is, the two things that you talked about. It's never just about the alcohol, fill in the blank, right? There's always something else there. And even though I'm very proud of the fact that I quit the drinking, I get to notice as a sober person that I still haven't addressed whatever that root cause is, because that same habitual consuming, occupying yourself behavior repeats in other things. So this isn't about me. Let's come back to you. There's a lot of questions I could ask, Patty. So before we get into kind of the next of the 5 questions, what more would you share with us about how this was manifesting and showing up in your life? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is describe the comma a little bit more. You said you had this relationship with food, and it was these 2-year cycles for 20 years. Now you've uncovered what the root cause was. Take us a little bit back to more what it was like for you while you were kind of sitting on the comma.
Well, so I think there was a lot of secrecy around. Like even though I didn't ever share anything about what was happening to me, there was a lot of shame about my weight, right? Like, and how
Mm-hmm.
I looked and all of that. And I think what ended up happening for me is I would, starting in my teens, I would go out, get very, very wasted, and hook up with somebody, right? Because that's the only really way that I could interact with a man, was to be kind
Mm.
of so out of it that I could be there. Because otherwise, sober, like, there was just no way I could do that. And I think, again, it was this quest for love. I was so lonely and so isolated, because even though I had all these great friends, no one knew me. So when we were talking before about being open, I was so closed. I used to think it was intrusive if somebody asked what I did over the weekend. Like, I
Mm.
was that closed. So I have just, that was kind of my daily prayer. Let me be open. Let me be open. Because you
Mm.
can't really live in the now unless you're open, right? Or you can't experience like the joy and the happiness unless you're open to receiving it.
I'm curious, what made you correct me where I jump in with questions or reflecting things back, and if things don't land right, but I can kind of make my own assumptions about what it was like for you, what it would be like for me if I were in that place. What kept you closed? You've talked about the shame. You've talked a little bit about, the secrecy. What though was it that kept you closed about it?
So I would say, when I was in college, I had this habit of, I would go out, I'd get wasted, I'd hook up with somebody. I didn't have sex with them, but I would end up in situations that I didn't want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And when I graduated from college, I moved back to New York and I did the same thing, right? I would go out, I would get wasted, I would hook up with some guy, but now it was more dangerous, right? Because now I'm not on a college campus, which, not to say college campuses aren't dangerous, but I was
Mm-hmm.
in New York City and I was 22, right? And I was doing stupid things. And I really was out one night, got wasted, and had like this moment where I thought, I cannot do this anymore. And I really did lock myself away. And I was in my mid 20s. I stopped going out. And, 1 year became 2, became 3. The longer it went on, the more isolated I became. I always had friends, but it got to a point where I was like, nobody had kissed me in a decade. Like, I had been alone for so long. And that becomes another whole shame to deal with. Like, how am I going to explain to someone how I've been locked away for so long? And even more than that, it was that, especially once I was in therapy, I didn't like to be kissed, right? Like that definitely brought up things for me. And that was such a stumbling block for me in terms of how I thought you started and ended dates. So even once I was like lost the weight and was ready to do online dating, it was so scary for me. Like, how was I going to navigate telling anybody about me without telling them about me? And that was my constant struggle. There were things I didn't want people to know. And I didn't feel like I could have like a normal interaction because I felt like I was so front loaded with, if you meet somebody and everybody's got baggage, everybody's got issues, everybody's got a story, but mine were kind of front and center in terms of what I wanted, which was a romantic relationship. So I had all these fears. And the more I was in therapy, the more we uncovered, it's like the more I understood how terrified I was, so it just became harder and harder to engage. And I think that's what happens probably with shut-ins. Not that I was anywhere near close to a shut-in. I went to work every day. I went out for dinner. I just didn't go out with men. But I think it becomes harder and harder to engage.
You shine a light on something that I don't think gets talked about a lot. And I know that there are many people, including myself, who can kind of relate to this sort of chronic or escalating compounding. That's the word I'm looking for. Compounding shame. I feel shame because of this, which causes me to then kind of withdraw. And then I feel shame for the withdrawal, but that's withdrawal plus the thing that I was originally ashamed for. And then the longer I say withdrawn, then now so I can relate to that. And I just want to acknowledge how difficult that must have been for you. I am seeing posts now from so far women on social media who are talking about we need to have the conversation about what it's like to be chronically single and what that does to you. So this is within the last 2 days. So it's so interesting you and I are having this conversation right now. It sounds like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that shame, that embarrassment was surrounding a belief that somehow these things that you had done and or were doing for yourself were somehow wrong in the eyes of other people.
That's interesting because I actually think it was really just to me. And I will say, as insecure as I was in many respects, I have always had a very strong, and I think I will be the first to say, I was not raised by attentive, loving parents, in my view, which is not to say that my mother didn't try, but she had her own issues going on. So I think I raised myself. And as such, nobody's opinion ever mattered to me more than my own. So and that I think is different than a lot of people. Like, so I trust my instincts above all else, which is not to say they might not be faulty, but I trust them. Like, I really do. I'm not one of those wishy-washy, can you tell me what to do? No, I know exactly what to do. I don't think anybody knows what's better for me than me, which again, may or may not be true, but that's kind of how I feel. But I do think that for me, at some point, I realized keeping the secret was almost more important than the secret itself. There's like this irrational belief that if I tell anyone my secrets, that it will somehow be the death of me. Like, especially because there are secrets that you start keeping as a child. So whatever that childlike perspective is, you never really lose it. And I think that's a fascinating thing that came out of all of my time in therapy. And while I was in therapy for 12 years, I did lots of different things. So I found this therapist who specialized in eating disorders, but it also turned out she specialized in EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's a kind of therapy I'd never heard of, and it's really for trauma victims. So the universe led me to her. She was perfect for me. And so we start working together, and honestly, my weight became the easiest thing to manage. I lost over 3 years. I lost more than 100 pounds. I've never regained it. It's been 16, 17 years. I mean, it's been a long time.
I so appreciate, Patty, the reference to therapy. And it sounds to me like the therapist has really done a lot it's benefited you in terms of your ability to really kind of crack open and explore these things. So I'll kind of leave that as a question. And in a second, I want to jump right into the second question. So before I ask that second question, how or what are the most profound ways that the therapist has helped you through this?
I think she was so instrumental in helping me kind of make sense of my past, because truly, had I had 100 years locked away in a room by myself, I was never going to land on my childhood sexual abuse. It just wasn't. I was never going to get there. And then I think, I'm very, you had asked me to describe myself, and I said resilient and tenacious. And I would say they are different things, but resilience is being knocked down and getting back up over and over and over again. And tenacious is just to continue moving forward no matter what. And because I had a goal, my goal was to find love. Even though I lost the weight, I didn't have what I wanted. So I kept going, and I am one of those people who doesn't stop. I'm all in or I'm all out. I'm not halfway. So I am all in on this particular one. So she and I had been working together and I made all this great progress, but I didn't have what I wanted. And to her enormous credit, she said, I'm going to look into other things that we can explore. And she found different therapies that I did try. I always continued working with her, but I saw a chiropractor, and it's called chiropractic care. So it's not like a traditional chiropractor, but it's really the thinking is that everything that happens to you is locked in your body. And so it's to kind of like you're in a perpetual fight or flight response, and it's to let go of what's trapped in your body, to let go of things that are stuck. So when I saw your thing about stuck, I was like, oh my God, this man like totally helped me become unstuck. And I will say what was fascinating about that is I never felt anything. The only emotion I was ever comfortable with was anger. I grew up in a house full of anger. So I'm very comfortable with anger, but I'm not at all comfortable with sadness or grief or sorrow or all these passive emotions. I felt like I would drown in them. So I didn't let myself feel them. And it was working with him that I started to feel, which is so important to understanding yourself, like understanding how you feel, what you feel, why you feel. So I worked with him, and then I made so much progress. I could feel, I could identify, like that was great, but I still didn't have what I wanted. So I worked with a sex therapist, which for me was a form of hell in and of itself, but I tried and it wasn't particularly successful. But I tried. I thought maybe that's the issue. And then I still didn't have what I wanted. So I started working. I was in a group therapy for sexual abuse. And, it was people just like me. And I had resisted that. That was the first thing my therapist suggested to me when I first started working with her. And it was a hard no for years. It was the last thing I did. And guess what? It worked, right? Like suddenly she had always wanted me to find community because I didn't know anybody like me, right? I was so ashamed of my story. I felt so ruined. I never shared it. I didn't know anybody. And suddenly I found community. And I do have to throw in one horrifying statistic for you. So 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys are sexually abused by the time they're 18. It's everywhere. And we don't talk about it. And when you said, what do I want to convey? What are my messages? One of them is it's everywhere. Don't delude yourself and think it's not. Right? It's deeply shameful still. It is the most taboo of topics. And for everybody out there who has experienced it, it is not your fault no matter what. It's not your fault.
And if I may add, and I certainly, cannot relate from the standpoint of having experienced this myself, but I have a belief that it's also something that now that people are speaking out about it, we're being able to pull it out of its prior definitions, which is, it's just all kind of part of the thing, or it somehow has been normalized in this world that we're kind of emerging from. As somebody who grew up in environments where it was always about, toughening up and, quit being so this or that or whatever, fill in the words, being so different. Like when these things happen, it's so easy for the perpetrators to gaslight you into thinking that that's just something that's kind of normal. And if you're reacting differently to it, then that's kind of you and your problem. And that's not the case.
No, I agreed. Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Patty, let me jump into the second question, and by all means go back and forth, because you've shared so much so far. The second question is this. As you look back at the comma that you were sitting on, that you've been sharing with us, what did that create for you?
You know what? I will tell you honestly, it was transformative because it helped me to finally kind of admit to myself that I was never going to fix a problem on my own or didn't have the tools to fix it on my own. Again, what I thought was my weight, that I was finally at a point where I was able to go and get help, and it opened my eyes to something else entirely. It has, you talked earlier too about, you didn't know, you couldn't believe that you'd ever be this age. You didn't think you'd be alive this long. And, I feel like we live in a time that's full of people that suffer and, are tormented in so many ways. But, I kind of I had a suicide plan. If I was alone at 40, I was going to commit suicide. And then it became 35. And then I was afraid it was going to be 30. And that was what propelled me into therapy, because I was in my 20s. I went to therapy the first time I was in my late 20s, and it propelled me into therapy. And I was so miserable then that this is an odd but true story. I was in therapy for 8 years. I went twice a week for 8 years. And I went in there and I said, I have problems with men. I have problems with my weight, and I have problems with my job. And I'm in my late 20s. And my therapist at the time looked at me and she said, no, you don't. You have one problem. You hate yourself. That's your problem. And it was. And so I worked with her for 8 years. Years later, I find this other therapist. I'm ready just to deal with my weight, blah, 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 blah. She wants me to go to, group therapy for sexual abuse. And I'm like, no, 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 no. I finally go. It's the therapist that I had worked with in my 20s. So it's now 20 years later, and I meet with her for a couple times before I become part of her group. And she did not know my story. And she saw me twice a week for 8 years. I never talked about it. I was so unhappy. I only looked at the present, never back.
Wow. That is mind blowing. There's a bunch of things in there that's mind blowing, but what, I mean, no, I'm not even going to reflect. Like, what does that say to you when you look at what you just shared with us? What does that tell you?
I think it is so easy to tamp down the things that are just too horrible to bear. I mean, and I don't think I'm at all unique in that respect, right? You just tamp it down, It's always just bubbling under the surface. But so many of us that struggle with the same issues over and over, we can't get out of our own way and we can't figure it out. It's because again, it's tamped down for a reason. It's painful, right? It's horrible. Nobody wants to go there.
Well, and like you said before, right? Like the keeping the secret was like more of a thing than the secret itself. And what was, okay, here we go. Here's the moment. Every episode, there's always some moment, like I said earlier, right? Like listeners, folks listening, myself included, we'll be like, oh yeah, I'm tracking. I get it, because we're making assumptions all along the way. And that's okay, right? Except there's always a moment in every episode where I like to go a layer deeper, and it's like, okay, we can make our own assumptions about what that means or what that was like. But for you, what was so important about keeping the secrets?
I think I really did feel ruined. And I think the whole notion is that whatever horrible things you think about yourself, you don't want other people to think them about you as well. So it's like, my therapist had said to me when I was in therapy, the second time, obviously, but that's what I'm talking about now. The second time when I was in my late 30s, and I was in therapy for 3 years before I told my friends. And, it took her 3 years to convince me that I could tell somebody. And she had said to me, she was like, put yourself in their shoes. She was like, wouldn't you want them to tell you if it was them? And I was like, of course. And she's like, wouldn't you be compassionate? And I was like, of course. And she's like, why do you think your friends would be any different? And it's like, I didn't. But it's like, I will say this it's another message I want to make people understand. I mean, look at me. I'm talking about my horrible childhood and the things that happened to me, and I'm okay. Like, I think it took me so long in therapy because I didn't want to integrate what happened. I wanted to disavow what happened, right? I wanted it to be undone, which was impossible. But, when you integrate, it's like it's a part of me, but it doesn't hurt me anymore. There's no shame. It's not my shame. It's not my blame. It's not my secret to keep anymore. And when I finally did tell my first friend, and it was horrible, it was like I uttered one terse sentence and it was all I could do. And a month later, I told another friend and I did a little better. And each time I did it, it got easier and easier. And I remember when I got to like the sixth person, I didn't even cry. Like, I had a whole conversation. It was like, because it gets easier. Anything that you undertake, you've been doing a podcast for 2 years. I can't imagine that this experience today is how much different it is than the first time you did it, or the second time you did it, or the fifth time you did it, right? It gets easier.
Yeah. Well, and it's like my coach, coaches always have coaches, or at least smart coaches always have coaches, right? And my coach and this is one of the biggest conversations that I have. And the reason I'm sharing this is because of what you've shared, right? And how I feel like this kind of builds on what you're sharing with us. And one of the biggest conversations I have with my own coach is do you have to wait until you believe in the thing to do the thing? And how often I do, because I depend so much on my feelings and my intuition and my gut and all that sort of thing. And I will never stop doing that, by the way. But like, man, how often my beliefs about what will or won't be gets in the way of just go do the damn thing and then see what happens, right? It's all up here,
I
right? I'm
agree.
pointing to my head.
And I think that that's that whole saying, fake it till you make it. So like one of the things they tell depressed people is smile every day, go out and
Hmm.
smile. And at some point it becomes second nature. And I do think it's true. I mean, I had been really depressed for a long time too. And it's like, you do certain things and it's like, okay. And I tried all of these different therapies and they all had their place. And, obviously it's what the universe wanted. I did them all. But the single most transformative thing I ever did was meditation. And that's because
Mm.
meditation is about now. And I think people either tend to look back or look forward, right? Most of us aren't present. But so there's a lot of people who ruminate about the past. I was forever looking ahead because I was controlling and I was going to make sure that I had every single scenario plotted out so that I could respond and I could move forward and I could game the system somehow, like I could protect myself. I would understand what was going to happen. And I think meditation was mind blown for me because it is all about now. It's about being present.
Mm.
And once you kind of get the hang of that, it's like you realize like how much time I spent imagining scenarios that never came to pass.
Mm. Mm, 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 mm. Oh, okay. Well, that feels like, first of all, I'm sitting here thinking about myself, as I think often people are going to do when we're listening to these stories. Like, what does that mean for me, and where do I fit in that? Um, let's ask the third question, Patty. This feels like a good stepping off point for
Okay.
that. And you can always keep going backwards, but what have you learned about yourself as a result of sitting on this comma?
I have learned that what I thought was impossible was never impossible. It was just a lack of imagination. And I think a lot of us are like
Mm.
that. We only see things through our own prism of life experiences, right? Like that's what colors our world and the way we see things. And I think because I didn't have any scenario in which I could possibly imagine myself moving forward in this world unashamed, that I didn't think it was possible. But it was
Mm.
possible. It's just that I couldn't see it. Right. And I
Mm.
think that's again when I say like I really that is what I most strive to be. I strive to be open because you don't know what's out there, the possibilities that exist. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it can't be real or true.
Here's a question I have for you, a very selfish question. I don't think I've ever asked this question before. This comes up a lot in conversations with a lot of people, right? And me as well, right? Like you don't do things or you don't think about things or you don't allow yourself to be open to things because you can't see them. For you, was your solution to find ways to see it, to teach yourself how to see it, or to be able to do it without seeing it, or something else?
I think I finally got to a point where, and my big intractable belief was that I didn't think I would ever be able to believe that it wasn't my fault. Again,
Hmm.
and we talked about this earlier, whether intellectually versus emotionally. And I was a child when it started, and I could tell you up and down till Sunday, it wasn't my fault, but I always felt like it was my fault. And I think that's very common for children, right? That it's a child's view of the world. Everything that happens is my fault. Nobody's taking responsibility. It's my fault. And I couldn't shake it. And I finally got to the point where I thought, well, you know what? Intellectually, I believe that to be true. And even if it was my fault, I did life already. I did the time. It's time to let
Mm.
it go, right? Like I did the time. And the shrink who was with the group therapy, she had said to me at one point, she was like, there is no substitute for experience. Like experience trumps all. And something ended up happening after the fact where it was a completely different scenario, but I thought, it's not my fault.
Mm.
It's something that just hit me so viscerally where I was like, it was never my fault. And again, it was a different scenario, but it triggered the same thing. And when I had that, it was like I finally believed everywhere, every part of me, that it was never my fault. It was never about me. I was somebody else's collateral damage. And God knows how many other people were his collateral damage as well.
Mm.
So
That
it was a combination of everything.
I can only imagine what that moment was like for you and how that must have felt.
It was like, I have to say It's actually in my book. It was like it's such a freeing kind of moment. And, this is also in my book. I had read, I don't know if you've ever read it. It's called The Boys in the Boat. And it was made
Mm.
into a movie recently, and it's about the 1936 men's Olympic rowing team. And it's the author had a horrible childhood, and he rose and all the rest of it. And there's this part of the book where truly a horrible childhood, where he's with his boys in the boat. They're the rowing team, and he surrenders to the belief that as long as he's with his boys, nothing will ever happen to him. They're in swing. They're one body, one boy operating as well. It's like this whole beautiful moment. And I'm
Mhm.
running, and I thought, I wish I had a team that I was, in swing with. He called it being in swing, when they were just operating as one. And I thought, I am in swing with the universe. I want what the universe wants no matter what. And that for me really became kind of like that moment where I surrendered everything, I think, to the belief that whatever the universe wanted was what I wanted. And no matter how dark and painful it might be, it was going to bring more light than I could ever possibly imagine. So I was open to the belief that it was going to be good for me, no matter what kind of hell it was to get there.
Mm.
And it made me feel less alone. It was the first time where I no longer felt alone.
Mm. That's powerful, especially for someone who, I mean, as you described earlier in your story about all of the isolation that you described that you felt in so many different ways and it's so many different points. Let me jump into the fourth question then, because you're going right there. As you look back at this comma that you sat on in your life, what has changed for you? I feel like you've already answered some of that, but what else would you add?
I would say I am not in a relationship now. I did find one, which was great. It was what I wanted. It
Mm.
was what I had searched for and yearned for. Um, I'm not in one now. I hope that I will be again, but I think I've just kind of learned to accept that not all of us are meant to have the same life. We don't all have the same things. We don't all have,
Mm.
you know, significant others or children or grand illustrious careers or riches, or we all are just not meant to have the same life, and that's okay. I'm more at peace with myself than I've ever been, and I haven't been in therapy. I stopped therapy 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I mean, so it's been a long time. And I feel like it's that saying about teach a man to fish. And it's like, it's true. Like the foundations, the
Mm.
things that I picked up in therapy served me so well. I understand myself. So I'm happier than I've ever been. And I think I'm happier than I ever thought I would be. Even though I am alone, I'm not alone. I have a dog, but I have lots of friends. But so even though it didn't necessarily turn out being what I most hoped it would be, it doesn't mean that it won't be what I most hope it would be. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. I don't know.
Well, and here's what I'm curious about, and I mean, I don't know if this will open up a whole nother thing or not. We're going to be nearing the end of the episode, but answer this however you feel you want to answer this. Here's what I'm curious about. It sounds like whatever you were seeking in wanting a relationship for those years, perhaps you have found it where you are today and from different sources. I mean, is that a fair assumption to make? I mean, you tell me.
Um, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, but I still really do crave that. I want the relationship. I do. I want, and it's funny because I felt like, adding Juniper, my puppy dog, to my life was all about building my family. And it was an adjustment for me. And, it was helpful to be in therapy for so long because I could figure out why she triggered me. And, puppies are like babies. They are unending oceans of need. And I grew up, I felt like abandoned and neglected. So it's almost like I resented, like, how much do you need? I'm giving you plenty.
Mm,
More? You
mm.
want more still? So, but it's like I could identify it. Like I could figure out what it was. And even though I don't like it about myself, I can say, all right, it's there. I don't like it, but at least I get it. I get why I do it.
And I might, if I can intervene, it also seems like this is self-referencing too. And that's also how I was trained to handle
Yes.
families, right? Like
Yes.
it's whether I like it or not, that's the learning that I had. I can overcome that maybe, but you didn't necessarily choose that.
Exactly. But I think you can change anything with enough time, attention, if you really want to. So I would say I still want that, but I feel like I'm building still. So I building her in. I want us to have a long, happy, healthy relationship. And then I think when the time is right, the man will come. Right. I do believe that the
Mm.
man will come, and it's, hopefully it's soon, but I can be patient.
Hmm. There was a creator on TikTok 2 days ago. She had a post and it was fascinating. I think I'd heard this quote before, but she's like, if you, oh, I'm going to get this wrong, but it was something like, if you want happiness for a year, get married. If you want happiness for a decade, get a dog. And then I've forgotten where it went. There was the third one, and it was probably based off of some old fable or something like that. But if you want happiness for life, then find yourself or something like that. I can't remember, but it's just interesting how you're bringing that up here. But what I want to highlight and bring back is, you said building my family. And that's I think what stands out for me that's changed is that you are building your family. You
Mhm.
have been building your family. You're finding different ways to build your family. And you're finding, it sounds like, different, just all kinds of different levels of satisfaction and fulfillment. Also, it seems like from how you even approach these situations and deal with some of the situations in your life.
I mean, I like to think so. I mean, I would like to think so. And again, it's, I think that it would be great if we could all say, this is what my life's going to be, and I'm going to be here when I'm this age and here when I'm this age. And, that's not how life works out. We can't control
Mm-hmm.
illness. We can't control the weather. We can't control, there's so many things we can't control. The only thing I can control is myself and my reaction to what happens to me. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think as long as I can try to maintain some sense of perspective, which is hard. It's very, very hard. But I think, if you can take a step back, look at it and think, we were talking before about, I don't know if this came up or not, but it's like catastrophizing things like, oh, it's going to be the end of the world if X happens. It's really not going to be the end of the world. Sometimes you just need to take a step back and think, I'll survive it. It's okay. It might suck in the moment, but it's not the end of the world. There are things that
Yeah.
really matter.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit too. That same thing in catastrophizing, and I don't know if this is true for you or not. What I'm finding at this stage of my life, it's really interesting. Like, there's the whole, okay, you can change your thought, you can change your belief and so forth. And like you just said, it's not really going to be that. Sometimes I have to get out of the room that I had the thought in order to have a different
Mhm.
thought. And what I'm finding more and more is, like, if I spend a lot of time at home or a lot of time in the office where I'm working or what have you, and then I start having these negative thoughts, I can sit there and do all the things that I know how to do as a coach to like reframe and reprogram and so forth. But I have lately been finding it's a whole hell of a lot easier to do if I remove myself from that room, even if it's just for
Uh,
10 minutes. And so, I don't know. It sounds like you've been removing yourself from the room in a metaphorical sense in terms of the different therapies you've tried. These are all different spaces, it seems, that you've been willing to go into different areas to learn things differently.
yeah, I have certainly tried. And, it's funny when you were saying that, it was making me think about um, shortly after I had Juniper, and my work was at its busy season, and I was really struggling, right? Because with her, I can't just work 18 hours a day. She needs me, right? It's a very different thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
really, try to remind myself, yes, I want to do a good job, but when all is said and done, I hope to have her for 15 years or more. There is nothing more important right now than her. Right. Like she's a puppy.
Mm.
She needs me, and I want our relationship to be rock solid. And basically, I went back to my clients and I was like, I can't do X, Y, and Z. I'm sorry. This is what I can do. And you know what? They were all great about it. And it's like the old
Mm-hmm.
me never would have done that. I would have just, made myself insane trying to please everybody. Whereas now I was able to be like, what's really important right now?
Yeah.
And it's her.
Yeah. Well, and giving yourself the option to really explore what's important, right? I mean, that's what you've been sharing with us. Patty, as we start to bring things to a close for this episode, I'll ask the fifth question as briefly or as much detail as you want to. The fifth question sometimes is an easy answer or a simple answer, and sometimes it's not. But what does getting off the comma look like to you
I would
or for
say
you?
it means letting go of things that you hold to be true and absolute. It's like just accepting that it's
Mm.
not. It's not. Which made so one of the things I always loved was the story of Pandora's box. And it's like, so the story is like she opens the box and all the evils of the world are thrust out, and she slams the lid shut, and the only thing trapped inside is hope. And it's like she has to open the lid again to let hope out. Because at the bottom of everything is hope, no matter how dire, no matter how awful, for most of us, because there are definitely people where it's really just that horrible. But for most of us, if we're lucky, at the bottom of it, there is still hope. Hope that it can change, hope that you can be different, hope that things will, you'll be strong enough, resilient enough, tenacious enough, whatever it is, lucky enough to be able to find somebody who can help you so that you can let go of what you believe to be impossible.
I love that. That's a really powerful kind of bow to put on the story that you've shared with us today. So thank you. I so appreciate everything that you've shared. Obviously, it's just one story of many, and it's just one part of your whole story. If people wanted to look you up, find you, follow what you're doing, maybe explore the book or books that you've written, or even just reach out and carry on the conversation with you, where could people find you? I'll put all the links in the show notes so you don't have to spell it all out for us, but where are you at?
So I have a website. It's pattycabot.com. And that's the best place to find me. My book is there. It's about really the 12-year period that I was in therapy. And, again, I was so closed when I started therapy, and I didn't tell anybody what was going on for me, that I would literally go home after every session and write down what happened as a way to process it. So my book is truly 12 years of actual conversations, experiences with all the different therapies I tried, and when I finally found love. So it is all there, and it is available for free on my website. And you can write to me at my website. And I will tell you honestly, I have like an Instagram. I'm terrible at social media. I really am.
I appreciate the candor. I'm choosing to be terrible at social media myself, so you won't get any judgment here. Okay, but they're there if people wanted to check out what's
they're
right?
there. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I did some TikToks for a while. I did some Instagram. My Instagram has become Juniper, so it's one of those things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So duly noted. Those are all in the show notes, but go to the website first. That's the primary point of contact. Wonderful. And, the last thing that I do in every episode, Patty, is a section called acknowledgments. And because this platform and these episodes are all about giving a voice to people and getting to hear the experiences of everyday people and basically lifting up voices. And your story wouldn't be complete if we didn't give you an opportunity to lift up other voices. And so in this section, I like to give my guests an opportunity to acknowledge others and give them a voice, boost them, lift them up. That could be causes and organizations. It could be other creators. It could be people within your immediate circle who matter to you. Who would you like to acknowledge today? And I'll make sure we put their information in the show notes.
I appreciate that. So the first one is the National Eating Disorders Association. And I think, I've given you some stats before about how many people are sexually abused. 42 million people have an eating disorder, and 29 million have been sexually abused in some way, shape, or form. And they very often go hand in hand. So food addictions, whatever they may be, childhood sexual abuse. I was a binge eater. Believe it or not, eating disorders are correlate with different kinds of abuse. And for childhood sexual abuse, binge eating is very common. So, if you're looking for, but it doesn't matter, any kind of an eating disorder, they can help you. It's free. They have all kinds of resources. I would go there. And then the other one is RAIN. It's rape, abuse, incest. What does it stand for?
National Network. Yeah.
Yeah, the National Network. Yeah. And they are amazing too. And I think one of the things to think about too is, especially when you talk to people about childhood sexual abuse, and there's all this focus on stranger danger. 90% of people are sexually abused by someone they know. It's not stranger danger. It's somebody in your school. It's somebody in your neighborhood. It's somebody in your family. It's that close. So
I so appreciate you giving a spotlight to these two organizations. I know they're very important organizations, and I definitely encourage folks to check these organizations out, especially if this story today resonates with something that you might be experiencing in your own life. So, Patty, thank you so much for showing up today, for, fulfilling your intention of being able to put your story out here and inspire others. And I will look forward to following your story as it continues to unfold.
Thank you, Paul. You have been so generous and such a open, you're what I strive to be. You're open.
Thank you so much. But this is what I strive to be as well. I feel like it's a calling for me, and it's not always easy to be that person, in this complicated world we live in. But, that's part of what this podcast is all about, right? Is hopefully folks are not only enjoying the value of the stories for the story's sake, right? And your story certainly today, but also like, it's okay to have conversations like this. We don't have to listen to a podcast to have these conversations. We can have these conversations with the people in our lives, or even strangers on a park bench, right? I've done that quite a bit in my travels. And so I'm hoping that not only is your story inspiring and reaching people, as I know it will, but that just what we're doing here is also giving people inspiration to do this very thing in their own lives. That's what I want to stand for right now.
I echo that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty. Have a wonderful weekend ahead, and I will look forward to seeing more about what you're up to in the near future.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much.
What an honor it is for me to witness these powerful stories. I hope you feel the same way too. Think about what you learned from this conversation. What stood out for you? What challenged you? What inspired you? And I encourage you to write it down in some form of journaling and reflection. Surprises can reveal themselves to you when you do this. And if you were moved by today's conversation, pass it along to someone you care about. Let's spread the word. Let's continue to build connection. And if you do discover something you'd like to unpack further, book a call with me and let's talk about it. My links are in the show notes. Be sure to like this episode, follow the podcast here on this platform and social media at Off the Comma. And feel free to comment and interact with these posts and episodes. Check out my website for workshops, events, and my sponsor community. I'm covering the costs of production by curating my own sponsors who align with our vision. Be sure to check them out. They're all powerful people and businesses. Thank you for listening to this episode of Off the Comma. As always, keep noticing and keep listening.